What if the most powerful truths were hidden not in books, but in silence? Have you ever wondered if numbers could sing, or if your soul once belonged to the stars? Before science spoke of vibrations, a mystic philosopher already knew the universe was music. When we think of Pythagoras, most of us picture right-angled triangles and chalk-covered equations from math class. But that image, although iconic, is like mistaking the tip of an iceberg for the entire mountain of ice below. The real Pythagoras was not merely a mathematician, he was a mystic, a seeker of hidden truths, and a guardian of forbidden knowledge that dared to look beyond the physical world to the eternal. He journeyed through the sacred temples of Egypt, delved into the cryptic mysteries of Babylon, and studied under the keepers of ancient wisdom, long forgotten by time. In those silent sanctuaries, Pythagoras didn't just learn equations. He awakened something deeper, a vision of reality as a living harmony. His true legacy isn't a theorem, but a cosmic language he claimed underlies all existence, the music of the spheres. And he wasn't alone in this quest. He built a school, not of students, but of initiates. There, silence was sacred. New disciples would spend years without uttering a word. Why? Because Pythagoras believed that before one could speak truth, they had to first learn to listen, not with ears, but with the soul. These weren't mere rituals, they were transformations. In the heart of that temple, knowledge was passed not through lectures, but through presence, vibration, symbols, and sound. What was taught was not safe. It was considered dangerous, powerful, and in the wrong hands, destructive. Let us now walk through the hidden corridors of his teachings, truths never meant for the masses, hidden truths about the soul, the sacred nature of numbers, the divine structure of the cosmos, and the eternal journey of the human spirit. Pythagoras taught that numbers were not abstract symbols, they were divine essences. The number one wasn't just a starting point, it was unity, the source of all. Two represented polarity, the beginning of tension. Three birthed balance. Four gave structure. These weren't arbitrary assignments, they were sacred meanings. Numbers, to Pythagoras, were spiritual forces. And nowhere was this clearer than in music. He noticed that when strings were divided in specific proportions, 2, 1, 3, 2, they created harmonious sounds. These weren't just musical rules, they were cosmic laws. The same ratios that governed music, he realized, governed nature itself. A sunflower, a nautilus shell, the spiral of galaxies, all followed these sacred proportions. This epiphany transformed him. Music was no longer entertainment. It was a spiritual path, a medicine, a prayer. He and his disciples used it to purify the soul. Before sleep, they played melodies to cleanse the mind. Upon waking, they tuned themselves with the cosmos. Every note was chosen not for beauty, but for transformation. And science, after centuries of dismissal, is beginning to catch up. Quantum physics now speaks of vibration at the heart of matter. Biology reveals how sound impacts DNA. Therapies are emerging that echo what Pythagoras knew millennia ago, that sound heals, aligns, and awakens. But he went further still. He believed that life itself was a cycle of births and deaths, not just in this world, but across dimensions of existence. The soul, he taught, is eternal. It journeys from body to body, learning, remembering, forgetting. Like a flame passed from candle to candle, it carries impressions from every life lived. This wasn't reincarnation as a fantasy. It was a spiritual responsibility. How you live now determines what you become next. Kings may become servants. Philosophers may return as birds. All life is sacred because all life is a vessel of consciousness. That's why Pythagoras and his followers refused to eat meat, not for diet, but for compassion. To harm another being was to harm a soul possibly older than your own. His school was not just a place of study, it was a crucible for the soul. Located in Croton, southern Italy, the Pythagorean order became a beacon. Men and women from distant lands came not to learn facts, but to transform. The initiation was intense, weeks, months, sometimes years of silence, not as punishment, but as purification. To calm the restless mind, to begin truly hearing. Only after this sacred silence would teachings be shared, and even then, in fragments. Because true wisdom isn't something given, it's something earned. Once inside, the life of a disciple was meticulous. Wake and sleep were timed. Meals were simple and symbolic. Their days revolved around the sacred studies of mathematics, geometry, music, astronomy, and meditation. These disciplines were not academic. They were spiritual technologies. Every gesture was a ritual. The way you ate, the way you breathed, the way you contemplated a symbol, all of it was part of a greater tuning of body, mind, and spirit to the universal rhythm. And central to all was the tetractys, 1 plus 2 plus 3 soir, 10. A symbol, a triangle of perfection, the point, the line, the plane, the volume. It was the Pythagorean vision of totality. To swear upon it was to vow truthfulness at every level of being. But harmony, as beautiful as it is, provokes envy. The order grew influential. Its members entered politics. They reformed cities, and that scared those in power. Whispers spread. Rumors swelled. Soon, mobs attacked. Temples were burned. Pythagoreans killed. Pythagoras fled. His legacy shattered, but not erased. What survived were fragments, phrases, symbols, legends. But those who had heard the silence carried it onward, in hidden libraries, in sacred architecture, in whispered teachings. And today, as our world drowns in noise and forgetfulness, his call returns. Because Pythagoras didn't want worship, he wanted understanding. He wanted us to hear not with ears, but with the soul, to see the world not as chaos, but as sacred geometry, to recognize ourselves not as flesh, but as eternal melodies, still learning to vibrate in tune. So if you've heard the music behind these words, perhaps you're ready, not for a lesson, but for the path. Imagine waking up in a world where every breath, every sound, every step you take is part of a greater design, where the air itself is not empty, but vibrating with a sacred harmony. This is the world as Pythagoras saw it, a reality not of randomness, but of rhythm. His eyes didn't see numbers the way we do. They saw energy, meaning, bridges between heaven and earth. Why do we feel awe when we gaze at a starry sky? Why do certain songs bring us to tears or lift us beyond pain? Because, Pythagoras would say, these are echoes of the eternal music. They are memories of the soul's true home. He taught that the stars themselves sing, not in frequencies our ears can hear, but in patterns our hearts can feel. Each planet in motion, each celestial orbit emits its own tone. Together, they create the symphony of the cosmos, and yet we don't hear it because we were born into it. Like fish who cannot perceive the water, we are immersed in sound but unaware of its presence. But to those who awaken, who attune themselves, the music reveals itself. That's why silence mattered. That's why his school demanded it. In silence, the external noise fades, and the internal song begins. Pythagoras' approach wasn't just philosophy, it was medicine for the spirit. He believed that when we are out of harmony, illness arises, not just in the body, but in the mind and soul. Chaos in our thinking creates chaos in our lives. But through proportion, through right relationship, through sacred sound, we can realign. His disciples didn't only study, they practiced. They trained their minds to think clearly, their hearts to feel compassion, their bodies to be disciplined instruments of harmony. Their lives became songs, their routines, rituals, their mathematics, prayers. And though the world rejected them, and fear tried to silence them, their vibration didn't end. It rippled forward, hidden in architecture, in mystical traditions, in the geometry of stained glass cathedrals, and the echoes of Eastern mandalas. Even now, in modern times, we stumble upon fragments of what Pythagoras once lived fully. When we marvel at fractals, when we lose ourselves in sacred music, when a sudden moment of clarity sweeps through us like a forgotten dream remembered, we are touching that same current. But here's the climax, the core truth he risked everything to share. The soul remembers. It remembers being stardust. It remembers vibrating with the universe before birth. And all of life is a journey of remembering what was never truly lost. Pythagoras called it anamnesis, not learning, not acquiring, but recalling the sacred. He believed we are all pilgrims who have forgotten their destination. In philosophy, music, number, these are our maps home, not to a place, but to a state of being, a resonance. And so, the school of Croton was not destroyed, it merely changed form. It lives today in every soul that seeks balance over chaos, wisdom over information, harmony over ambition. It lives in the quiet choice to speak less and listen more, in the reverence for simplicity, in the awe before a triangle or a melody. This, Pythagoras taught, is the real alchemy, not of gold, but of spirit, not of lead to metal, but fear to wisdom, division to unity, forgetting to remembrance. And now, perhaps it's your turn. Perhaps the silence within you is ready to awaken, to remember, to resonate, to live not just in the world, but in tune with it, because the music never stopped. It's still playing, and all it takes to hear it is to truly listen. Let us return now to the temple at Croton. Imagine walking through its quiet halls, not lined with statues of gods, but with echoes of presence. The air charged not with incense alone, but with intention. A sacred geometry was built into every stone, every pillar, every corridor. Each space was constructed according to precise mathematical proportions, not just for beauty, but for resonance. The architecture itself was a form of prayer, a mirror of cosmic order. Stepping inside was not just entering a building, it was stepping into alignment. Disciples didn't memorize teachings, they lived them. Even their movements were choreographed with awareness. How you walked, how you sat, how you greeted others. Each moment was an act of self-remembrance, because the body, to Pythagoras, was the temple of the soul, not in metaphor, but in fact. And just as a harp must be tuned before it can sing, so too must we tune ourselves through right action, right speech, and right silence. One of the most profound rituals was the contemplation of the pentagram, not a symbol of superstition, but of spiritual perfection. Its angles, its ratios, held within them the golden proportion, what we now call the divine ratio. To meditate upon it was to peer into the mathematics of life itself. It was said that if a disciple truly understood the pentagram, not with the mind, but with the soul, then they no longer needed to ask questions. They had found the answer already living inside them. Yet even in this disciplined life, there was no dogma. Pythagoras didn't offer commandments. He offered questions. He asked his disciples, "What is your soul made of? What do you align with, chaos or harmony? How much of your life is truly yours? And how much is merely reaction? Are you awake, or are you asleep inside the dream of the world?" These weren't philosophical riddles. They were keys. Keys meant to unlock memory, insight, awakening. And through their daily practices, the disciples began to change. They grew in virtue, yes, but also in perception. They began to sense the rhythms of the moon, the breath of the earth, the subtle tones of thought itself. They became, in time, not just followers, but initiates, carriers of a vision too vast for language and too sacred for the unprepared. The fall of the temple in Croton did not end this lineage. It scattered it like seeds on the wind. And wherever those seeds landed, new traditions blossomed. Some would find their way into Plato's dialogues, into the Hermetic texts, into the mysticism of early Christianity and Sufism. Others would hide within architecture, within cathedrals whose stained glass windows were shaped to mirror the Tetractys and the golden ratio. Still others would be passed in whispers, from master to disciple, in desert caves, monastery libraries, and inner sanctums across the world. And now, in a world once again ruled by speed and noise, those seeds stir once more. They stir in the hearts of those who feel that life must mean more than consumption, more than productivity, more than survival. They awaken in the souls of those who seek not escape, but remembrance, who long not for distraction, but for depth. And perhaps you are one of them. Perhaps you too have felt the call, a faint vibration in your chest when you hear a certain song, or see a pattern in the clouds, or lose yourself in the dance of numbers. Perhaps something ancient within you stirs at the mention of sacred geometry, of silent temples, of eternal return. If so, then this story was meant for you, not to entertain you, but to invite you to pause, to breathe, to wonder. What if Pythagoras was right? What if numbers are alive? What if your soul is older than the stars? What if harmony is not an idea, but a practice? What if every thought, every gesture, every heartbeat is a note in the great cosmic symphony? Then the question becomes, are you in tune? Because harmony is not passive, it must be chosen. Every day you're tuning yourself to anger or peace, to noise or stillness, to fear or love, and each choice echoes through the chambers of your being. So today, choose to remember. Remember that you are not separate from the universe. You are the music it plays. You are the number that vibrates, the triangle that breathes. You are, as Pythagoras taught, a soul on a sacred journey home. Welcome back. Let's delve even deeper into the heart of why this matters today. More than ever, we live in a time where knowledge is abundant, but wisdom is rare, where we can calculate the orbit of a planet, yet forget to breathe in rhythm with our own hearts. Where algorithms predict behavior, but fail to awaken the soul. And yet, what if hidden in the chaos of our modern world is a silent call, a geometric whisper that invites us back to ourselves? That was the genius of Pythagoras. He didn't want followers, he wanted awakeners. He believed that each soul carried within it the entire universe, in miniature. That if you studied yourself deeply enough, truly listened to your inner sound, you would discover the same ratios, the same structures, the same sacred harmony that governs the stars. To him, the human being was not a flawed sinner, nor a mere animal, but a cosmic instrument, capable of incredible dissonance, but also of unimaginable beauty. The challenge was not to become something new, but to return to what was always true. And he left us a map, a sacred thread woven through the teachings of number, sound, silence, virtue, discipline, a path that does not demand blind faith, but clear seeing. This path begins when we stop seeing knowledge as information and start seeing it as transformation. When we understand that the right proportion between mind and heart, between thought and breath, between action and stillness, can unlock entire dimensions of experience. This is not mythology. This is a practice, and every moment is an invitation to step onto that path. Are you ready to remember? Close your eyes for a moment. Picture a solitary figure standing in the moonlight, robes flowing, hands lifted not in preaching, but in stillness, listening, not to words but to vibrations, to the inaudible chorus of the stars above, to the rhythm of earth below, to the quiet song of the soul within. That was Pythagoras, not the man you read about in dusty textbooks, but the mystic who believed that every being, plant, stone, animal, child, was a note in a divine orchestra. To him, even death was not the end. It was merely a change in melody. He saw life not as a linear path, but as a great spiral, each existence a chance to harmonize deeper, to fine-tune the frequency of our choices. And the soul? It was a traveler of light and shadow, learning, listening, remembering. So why does this matter now? Because we have forgotten how to listen. We fill every silence with noise, every pause with panic, every moment of stillness with distraction. And in doing so, we have lost the music, but it's still there. It hums in the spaces between heartbeats. It resonates in the sacred geometry of a sunflower. It echoes in the symmetry of snowflakes, in the proportions of a seashell, in the spiral of galaxies, and it waits for us to remember. Pythagoras offered no dogma. He offered attunement. He invited us not to believe, but to resonate. So begin now. Light a candle. Breathe slowly. Observe a shape in nature, a leaf, a stone, a flame. Ask yourself, what does this teach me about balance, about beauty, about truth? Let every number become a revelation. Let every silence become a prayer. Let your life become a temple, not built of stone, but of choices made in harmony. This is the forbidden teaching, not because it is secret, but because it is sacred, because it cannot be spoken, only lived. So live it, and let your life become the echo of an eternal song, started long ago by a man who listened to the stars and heard the voice of the soul.